What's up, model makers? It's time for another update in the episodes of the Accurate Miniatures 1/48th scale b-25b Mitchell project. The last episode got me through doing the first part of the marbling on the wings and getting ready to do the blend layers. And then I kind of got out of order. That was about a month ago, and I switched over to some other projects, but I had already started collecting clips for this episode, and I prematurely called this episode number 97. And but then I didn't finish it, and I had to move on and do some other episodes, and so I got it all out of order, and so there was this silly little hole in my in my catalog of video episodes. And so anyway, it is what it is. That's why this is episode number 97, even though I'm actually over 100 now, so whatever. It is what it is. Anyway, this episode has some good stuff in it, I think. This one gets through the rest of the painting and so forth on the top surface of the wings. And, well, I'll just let you check it out. Let's take a look. Okay, so here we are back with the Mitchell wings, and I have continued to make some progress. As you can see, we've now got some green paint on here, and both of the engine nacelles have been masked and painted. And the way that I masked those, just real quickly, the first one I did with Panzer Putty. If you guys haven't heard of that, it's a pretty neat product. In fact, I've got some here. If I can dig it out quick, you can see what it's like. Hang on. Now, let's see if I can get the lid off of it quickly. While I'm getting the lid off, I'll just tell you that I didn't really enjoy using it for this. I rolled it into sausages like I would have with blue tack. And it rolls up easily. That's one thing that I liked about it. It didn't stick quite as easily as blue tack, but I got that all worked out and it was fine. But the problem with it is that over about half an hour, it deforms. Whoops, there goes the lid. It deforms and you lose some of the shape that you've worked hard to create, which is annoying. And you can see that right here. This stuff is essentially silly putty, but it's more liquidy even than silly putty. And you can see this was a rough looking pile 3 or 4 days ago when I put it back in the can. And you can see that it's basically just sort of oozed down into this shape. So that's what happens with it. And it's kind of stringy sometimes when you're pulling it off. I mean, it works really good, and I think in certain situations, like if you need a hard edge camouflage, this is probably a great tool. But for creating a sort of semi-soft edge, which is what I want in this case, because I want to show that the pattern was sprayed on, so I don't want a super hard edge. But it's not, it's got to be a little tighter than I can achieve doing it freehand. I just don't think the Panzer Putty was all that good. So what I did for the other nacelle is I had found from doing some touch-ups that if I just took this little towel and I folded it double, and that gave me a little bit of a rounded edge there like that, and then either held it in place or taped it where I wanted it, that I actually got exactly what I was after. I got a sort of a semi-soft edge. And you can see that here on the bottom of the fuselage. That's basically what I've done. It's not perfect, but I don't want it to be. But it's, it's neither hard or soft. So I think that was one of those sort of spur of the moment tool decisions that ended up working out in my favor. Anyhow, as far as the rest of the bottom goes, there's a couple of things that have happened here. Pretty small sort of things, but worth pointing out nonetheless. One is that I've gone in, as I was saying, and done what I call the functional panel lines with Tamiya's black panel line wash. And you can see how much darker that is and how much it stands out. And it's super dense. The Tamiya panel line washes have that characteristic. They are really dense. I don't think any other panel line wash that I've used, and I've tried the AK and the MIG, has that sort of density. So that's good. Something else that happened that does occasionally is I had a couple of nicks here on the bottom of this wing from just handling it. And that can occasionally happen with acrylics, no matter how careful you are. Stynylrez is, as I've said many, many times, a fantastic primer. But one of the reasons that it doesn't make it to being 100% as good as an old school lacquer primer is that it's just not as tough. And you can knock it off, and that happens occasionally. And if you're looking for a pristine finish, that's a problem. But I obviously am not. And so what I did is, where that fleck came off, I just went in with a very tiny brush and a little bit of Vallejo metal color and filled in just enough that I didn't lose the jagged outline, but now I've got a chunk of paint ripped off of bare aluminum. Same thing there on the back, and it looks pretty realistic. So I like it. That's the sort of random damage that I enjoy on my vehicles. I also have been sitting here doing some streaking. You can see there I've got a few just random streaks, nothing major. I've got one that I've started right here in this corner that I'll try to go ahead and finish. And what I'm doing is I've got some Winsor & Newton oils here on a piece of cardboard. And I'm doing something that I have not been doing before, and that is actually putting them on cardboard and letting the linseed oil get drawn out of them. I confess that in the past I've just been too lazy and not really thought that it was that important, but I'm reading one of Mike Rinaldi's books right now, and he stresses the importance of doing that and the fact that it makes the oils more manageable and it makes them dry faster. And he convinced me, and he's right. It does make them more manageable. I feel like my streaks are turning out better than they ever have for that reason. So it's a good tactic. Now I'm using this big soft brush to get the streaks moving, and that I was trying to do it dry, and that's what I was doing just there, because that's something else that Rinaldi emphasizes is doing your blending with your brush as dry as possible, because that also helps keep things more controllable. And if you are going to use any mineral spirits or turpentine to get the oils moving, to unload almost all of it from the brush before you do that. And so, since this brush, so that I had done that on some of these other streaks, but the brush has dried out since then, and so I went and added a little bit, and you can see exactly what the problem is there. I'm not working with my Optivisor, and I don't have a very delicate touch at the moment. And even with a tiny bit of mineral spirits on this brush, I basically just completely washed that streak off. And that obviously is not what I want, but that's the good thing about working with oils, is that you can pretty easily redo it. So let's do that. Now, this is also something Rinaldi talks about, is his favorite brush for applying oils is this number 2 round point, because it has such a sharp point. And so what he does is just barely get any on the tip. You can't even see that there's any on there. And then before you do anything, unload it on your piece of cardboard or your hand or whatever, and just very carefully apply just a tiny amount. So that's what I'm doing there. And I'm kind of going to start the streaking with this brush. Get it moving a little bit in the direction of the airflow. So that gets me a little bit of a discoloration there. And, you know, streaking should be subtle, you know, especially given, you know, the scale that we're working at. They should be pretty hard to see, really. So I'm unloading the mineral spirits from this brush, this big brush, even more. And now I'm going to have another go at this, and it just takes next to none for the oil to get moving, and you can see there exactly what I'm talking about. Just barely touched off on that, but that I think is a pretty nice subtle streak with a little bit of variation. Looks pretty natural, and I'm using raw umber for this one just to give me a little bit of a color breakup from you know, the other grime that's going on there, the dark browns and grays and so forth. So anyway, there we go. That's a little bit of streaking, and I think that's probably about enough. I've got about half a dozen of them on there, and I think that's plenty. Now, let's take a look at the top surfaces, because I've also done quite a bit of work there. And that'll do it for this little clip, which is good since I can't seem to keep from bumping into the damn camera. Okay, so this is the beginning of the black basing and pre-shading and so forth for the top surface. So the first thing I'll cover is the most obvious, and that's this aileron. And why is it a different color? So the ailerons and the other control surfaces on the Mitchells were, or at least the early ones, were canvas. And when you look at photographs, they have a distinctly different luminosity, different color tonality than the rest of the airframe. And so what I'm going to do is I appreciated that with this Mr. Paint RLM79 Sand Gelb, so that when I come over it with the top coat, I will get a lighter and a warmer color than the rest of the olive drab, and I think that'll work pretty good. I think it'll look good. Now, as far as the rest of the pre-shading goes, the first thing that I did was I came in with a full strength olive drab and did a pattern around here, around the nacelle and across where these ribs are. And that's a pattern that I've seen in photographs. And I'm going to have some of that showing in the final thing, but not much of it. It's going to basically represent places where the paint just doesn't wear as fast or whatever. At any rate, then what I did is I came in with the olive drab lightened. And I should say, before I get too far along here, that the olive drab on the bottoms and the sides of everything, where it's not going to get as much sun, is the Tamiya XF62 with about 20% Tamiya flat white in it. And so this pre-shading, because it's top surface, it's going to be more faded, is the same mix, except it's about 40% white. So definitely we'll get some contrast there. So anyway, the way that black basing works, and then there are other people who can explain this far better than I can, but the basic idea is that I'm going to spray as small as I can and as randomly as I can and produce this sort of color noise and contrast noise all over this surface, so that when I come back over it with the top coat, that just like any other pre-shading technique, that some of those tonal variations will show through. And I'll be able to control that with the density of the color coat, the top coat. And Hopefully that will help me achieve a more interesting surface than something that's just plain flat olive drab. Okay, so on to the next phase of paintwork with this wing. You can see that this is the other wing, and I've done the same thing where I've got this tan color on the aileron, and I've also got a panel that I masked and sprayed in pure olive drab. So that'll show up as a darker rectangle underneath the top coat. Just something that I've seen in photos and just that I think is cool and again adds to the visual interest. Now what you'll notice is that I've got a lot of light colored splotchy stuff going on here. And what this is sponge work. And again, what I'm after doing there is creating a lot of random tonal variation. Hopefully you can see that there. And I do this for two reasons. One is that it's difficult for me, even as small as I can paint with my 0.5 millimeter needle on that Iwata TH, or even with the 0.35 millimeter needle on my Neo, I can only spray so small. I can't get down as fine as someone, for example, who's working with a 0.2 millimeter needle in an Iwata Custom Micron. But that's okay, because I've got other options. The problem is that, as you can see here, that I get sort of a large spray pattern, and it doesn't give me quite the amount of noise that I'm trying to build up. The second reason, though, is that what I don't want is for everything to look like an airbrushed pattern. And there's a certain point where that's inescapable, because that's exactly what it is. It's airbrushing. And if the camera will focus, there you go, you can see that. And so what I'm doing is I'm using the sponge to provide some more sort of hard-edged variation that I think is a good representation of what happens with this paint in real life as a result of things like foot traffic and so forth. So there's a couple of reasons for doing that. Now, one thing people might ask is, well, doesn't that create a texture? And the answer is it could if you're not careful, and also depending on the paint that you use. If you let it pile up while you're doing the work, then yes, you can get a bit of a thickness there that will create a texture. And again, it also depends on the paint. I've found that that's a little bit more of an issue with some than others, but with Tamiya, it doesn't seem to be a problem. It works really well. But the real key is in how you mix it, and I'm going to do that right now because I've got a little more sponge work to do. And here's basically what I do. So I've got my jar of color, and I'm going to just take and add a couple of drops to this cup. I'm putting in, I think, 4 or 5 drops. Because what I'm going after here is about a 50-50 ratio of green to white is where I'm at with the green tone on that. I want it to be pretty light. So hang on, let me wipe off my little stick here so I don't stick a bunch of green paint into the jar of white. That's not good. Okay, so now just going to take and add 3 or 4 drops of the white, and I'll stir that up, and you'll be able to see the color tone that I'm getting and kind of how that compares to the pure olive drab. Okay, so you can see it's a pretty light green, which is exactly what I want. If it's a little too light, no big deal, because I can always tone it down with my top coat. Okay, now here's the real trick to this. I'm going to add some alcohol thinners to it. And what I'm going to do is put enough in there to make it where it's like 10% color, if that. Okay, so you can see how much liquid I've got in there, and let me give that a good stir. and we'll be ready to go. Okay, so I've got that mixed up. All right, now let me get the fuselage over here because that's what I'm gonna work on. This thing is always a hassle to set up for something like this because of this silly nose gear sticking out of the front of it all the time, but hey, it is what it is. And oh look, I just smeared some white paint right there that was on my thumb. Now, am I all upset about that? Of course not, because guess what? That's random weathering, and I like it. So it'll stay unless I just become unconvinced that it can work. Doesn't bother me a bit. It's just becomes part of the flavor. Okay, so now I've got this piece of sponge, which is just some sponge out of a I don't know, I think it was probably some Edward Brasson parts. It's great for this kind of thing. What I'm going to do is just get a little bit of this wash on there, and then I'm going to unload most of it on my paper towel. Just take one quick dab there. All right, and then I'm going to just start working this. In real random areas. Now, I'm going to concentrate most heavily right here across the top of the fuselage where the wing is, because that's where most of the foot traffic is. Now, the trick with this is to work and not let it just dry and pile up. Okay, so I'm going to keep working. I've got some fairly large splotches there, but I'm not going to just let them lay. I'm going to keep working, and you'll notice that the spots get smaller as I keep going. Okay, and I just keep working until I'm satisfied that I've got a fairly even layer. Now, if you do end up with some texture, it's not a big deal. You just rub it out with some steel wool or a little bit of fine sandpaper. Okay, so that's the beginning. Now, what I will continue to do is, as this dries, I will keep doing it in more random patterns. And then what happens is that the density of that color will build up more in certain areas than others, and it'll give me more random tonal variation, and that's exactly what I'm after. Okay, last little bit of commentary on this sponge work. You can see where I've continued to build this up, and I've got some varying density there. The other thing that I'm trying to do, besides just get a random variable noise in the density of the color, is also get some noise in the size distribution of the spots. So take a look when I zoom in here. Hopefully the camera can focus on that. See how I've got lots of little bitty spots kind of in and around there. Now, let me focus on this area back here in particular. Notice how I've got quite a bit of the lighter green color around here in the back of this area. Now, what's going on with this area right here, you guys may remember when I talked about this little plate right here. What happened when they found out with these planes is that with the guns level, that the blast from the 50 cals was so powerful that it was popping the rivets out of the skin right here. And so they added this extra thickness of aluminum to protect against that. So anytime you've got that kind of work going on, you're going to have a lot of foot traffic and a lot of activity, and tools being set down and drug around, and various things happening. So that's going to create this area of sort of wear and tear. But that's going to peter out, taper off, if you will, around the edges where you have fewer and fewer impacts, I guess, is the thing to say. And so what I'm trying to do is not only create variable sizes of splotches here in the middle, but then move more towards smaller and smaller ones around the edges. to illustrate that effect. And I'm doing that, as you can see, with my handy little pointer here, a tiny little piece of sponge in my gripper tweezers. And I think that works pretty well, gives me lots of control. I just put my Optivisor on and get a little paint on this thing, and I unload most of it like I showed you before on the paper towel and go at it. And I think that distribution of tonal variety as well as size variety within these effects is what it takes to make them effective. So there you go. Okay, so let's have a look at some progress. But first, I kind of have to apologize. This whole video segment for this project has gotten a little bit disjointed. The last clip that I filmed was about a month ago, and then I switched over to some other projects. But I also prematurely gave this segment the number 97, which was dumb because I've had to move on past that, and so it's now sort of a little out of sequence thing. But anyway, it is what it is. As you can see, I have got this wing done up with a blend layer. Kind of lost my verbal train of thought there. Anyway, so what I did on this one, since you last looked at it, is I added a little bit more tonal variation in some random areas with the same tan color that I used on the ailerons there. And then I went ahead and did the blend layer. And I did the blend layer. I mixed myself up I used one of my spare empty Vallejo bottles. I mixed up a mix of 40% white to the Tamiya olive drab, and then I thinned that to about 80% thinner. And that's been working pretty good for the blend layer. Then I've gone through several more layers of adding chipping fluid, doing sponge work, and gradually working to get to the sort of level of subtlety and contrast that I'm after in the end product. And what this is ultimately going to look like when I finish with the acrylic portion of the work is this right here, because the other wing is, I think, finally where I want it to be. And so you can see that as I've moved along, that I'm gradually kind of reducing the contrast of the effect, which is by design. Start out strong and gradually reduce it is a better strategy than trying to strengthen it as you go. Hopefully this is going to be strong enough. I always worry because you get a lot of tonal crush with olive drab, but there's not a lot of bright colors on this aircraft as a whole. I mean, it's only wearing insignia on the left wing and the fuselage sides, so I don't think there's going to be a whole, really a huge problem with that. There's not any nose art to distract you, so hopefully this level of subtlety is going to be good. And I'll zoom in here so that you can take a closer look at that. What this actually represents is about 8 layers of sponge work and chipping fluid and dull coat to lock in each layer before I do the next layer of chipping. And that was actually sort of a hard lesson. What happened on the first wing was that I had done the marbling layer with my airbrush and then done the sponge work, as you saw in the last clip, and then came across with the blend layer and then did chipping fluid. And I'm using, for this one, I'm using the Scratches Effects stuff. So I came across with that, and then I did the blend layer. And when I went to actually do the chipping, it went straight through to the primer very quickly. And so I had to be very careful, and it just didn't turn out the way that I wanted to. So I quickly realized that unlike my Mini Art D7 Caterpillar project that I'm working on right now, where I'm chipping down to the primer, which is very tough and you know, goes nowhere, that when I'm chipping on top of another color layer, that I really have to do something to lock that in. And so what I've been doing, because it's very effective and very convenient, is I just hit it with a quick layer of good old school Testors dull coat straight from the can. And you know, this, you may be like freaking out right now. How can you possibly point a spray can at your model? Well, look, this stuff is so forgiving, like most lacquers, and it just goes down beautifully. It looks like when you spray it on there that it's just a flood, but it shrinks down super tight and looks like almost nothing is there, but you have a very perfectly flat and uniform finish. I mean, this does not have a dull coat on top of it right now, but it's been used, I think there's probably 3 layers of dull coat in this area right now. So you can see, I mean, it's, you know, it's nice and tight. No worries there at all. So I highly recommend it. And I use one of these gizmos right here. This is one of these can gun things, which you can get for like $6 on Amazon. Super, super handy. So when you need a quick shot of ungloss and you don't want to have to clean an airbrush or anything like that, then this is a super handy tool for that, and it's a really nice flat finish. Some people think it's too flat. I don't particularly understand that, but hey, each to his own. So this is where I'm getting to, or hoping to get to, before I go on to the next round of work, which will be masking and painting the de-icing strips on the leading edge. But before I do that, what I'm going to attempt to do, and this may be silly and it may not work, is to take this wing, which is ready for, it's had a, it's been dull coated, and it's got a layer of chipping fluid on it right now, and it's ready for its next blend layer. And so what I'm going to attempt to do is show you that on camera. Not the spraying of the chipping fluid, because I already did that. And what I'm doing is basically, what I've kind of come down to with this stuff is that I do 2 layers. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it. I'm saying that that's what I have kind of distilled out as a process that works for me. This stuff is alchemy, folks. It's a very unscientific. I'm not even going to try to pretend that I know what I'm doing with this stuff. I just have found a method that produces satisfactory results. So you're kind of on your own to figure that out, but it is effective. I'm going to be doing some testing with some actual hairspray and some other stuff, though, to see, because Mike Rinaldi prefers hairspray over the actual chipping fluid. So anyway, but that's a whole other story. What I'm going to do is go ahead and put the blend layer on here. I'm giving it about 15 minutes to dry before I start the chipping work. And so what I'll do then is try and capture some of that chipping work on camera for whatever that's worth. Okay, so it's been about 10 minutes and it's time to get started on this. And timing with chipping seems to be pretty critical. I try to always give it about 15 to 20 minutes to dry. And again, that's not because I'm saying that's correct, but because I've figured out that that's what works for me. What I have definitely found is if you go too soon, that instead of chipping the paint, what you're actually doing is just dissolving it. And that's no good. And that's especially happens if you are using a real thin blend layer. So just that's something to be aware of. So what I'm doing is just, I've got some water here on the bench. I just dip my brush in that and then get most of it off. And I always start with this big soft brush. And I'm going to start here. I'm probably going to be bumping the hell out of the camera as I do this, but it is what it is. I'm starting here on this aileron, and you can see I'm just trying to make real fast strokes that kind of, they don't have to go in the direction of the airflow. That's irrelevant. But it's a convenient direction for this particular area. And this is going to be pretty subtle right here, so I don't know if you're going to be able to see it as I'm doing it or not, because I've got a real subtle tonal variation that I'm picking up in this area. But you can see kind of what I'm doing there is just working it, working it fast and just letting the brush do the work, not trying to scrub, just letting the soft bristles do their thing. And that's how I start out. I start out with the gentlest approach possible, because if things get out of hand, then the effect is ruined and I have to do it again. Okay, now I'm going to move over and work on this wing walk area. I also have some fluid on the top surface of the engine nacelle here. And you can't see it probably, but this is picking up a really lovely and subtle tonal variation there, which is what I'm after. Now, one thing that you have to figure out for yourself is what's the right amount of water and how long to let it sit there. I have found that just sort of depends on how much paint I'm trying to work through. In the situation that I'm in. If the paint is thick and heavy, then I can allow the surface to be wetter, and in fact I might even try and keep it wet the whole time. But if the paint is relatively thin and I'm going for a more subtle effect, then what I will try to do is use a brush that's just kind of damp. So we'll see, and you can see that it's coming up there, and maybe it's getting a little out of hand. Not too big of a deal, because again, this is all about randomness, but you just have to be conscious and watching what's happening as you're doing it. One thing that definitely is a good key tip is, as soon as you start to see the paint move on to a new area. Because if you keep going, you stand the chance of removing too much. And it's always easier to do more chipping than it is to come back and have to repaint an area and do it again. So you just have to be conscious of what's going on as you work. And once you see that paint starting to give it up, then move on and let it dry a little bit, and then see how it looks before you continue. So I'm going to just keep working this a little bit, and then we'll come back to it here in a second and see how things are turning out. Oh, one other step that I do is, and this is proven to be a good step, but one that I haven't read anywhere in any of the advice about chipping, is that I come back after it dries. I come back with a Q-tip that I dampen with water, and I'll come back and just very lightly brush over the surface that I'm working, and that does two things. It provides an additional bit of chipping itself, and gives you a slightly different effect because the Q-tip is firm, as opposed to being soft like the brush. But it also clears away the film or the residue that's left over. And so you get a little bit more contrast, and you get a little bit better idea of how much chipping you've actually done. And I'm actually kind of working a little harder on this end of the aileron here, because what I'm finding is that the chipping did not take quite as well here on the outboard end of it. And that, could be for any number of reasons, because I didn't get enough chipping fluid laid down there, or the paint's a little bit thicker, or whatever. That's just, there's quite a few variables going on with this process, and that's really the challenge, is just kind of figuring out which one you're dealing with at at any given moment. Okay, so I'm about where I want to be with this, and you can see that I've just kept scrubbing until I've got more uncovered paint here in a nice random way. Now, it's important, a couple of things to keep in mind while you're doing this. If you're doing two wings that need to match, it's important to sort of, keep your situational awareness going and check, the other piece to make sure that you're not getting a lopsided effect, and looking at it in different lights and different angles to kind of make sure that, what you're doing is going to look right. The other thing that you'll notice as you go along is that as the paint cures and as the easy stuff comes off, the work becomes harder. And so what I do is I go through a succession of brushes. After my really soft big brush stops working, then I switch to this brush that I've clipped down, which is a little softer, a little flatter on the end, and is a little bit more aggressive. Then my final one, which is really aggressive but also gives me a lot of control, is this one. This is like a number 0 junk brush that I've clipped down to basically just be stubble. And it really gets after it, but it's much more precise. And then I'm always following on with the damp Q-tip. And that also is important, because one thing you have to keep in mind that while you're doing this and you're watching the effect happen is that the water itself is going to increase the level of contrast. And it's going to make it look like you've got a greater effect than you actually do. It's kind of like when you put a clear varnish on top of something, if you notice how that increases the contrast level. So it's good to let it dry and see where you're at, and then go back at it in repeated sessions, as opposed to just thinking that you're going to get it all done in one shot. And that's also why I end up doing so many layers. Another thing to keep in mind is that this is not the end of the work. Okay, not only can you come back and do more chipping, but once you're done with the acrylics, you can do what I'll do, which the first thing is that I'll come in here with some steel wool or a really fine like 1000 grit or 2000 grit piece of sandpaper, and I'll rub that down a little bit, not only to make sure that there's not any stray textures, but also to do any, but also to just do a little bit of blending. Because again, I'm still scrubbing paint off with that little bit of sandpaper or steel wool. I'm just doing it in a slightly different way. The other thing is that this is all the acrylic work. What's going to come later is that I'm going to be doing work with oils in selected areas and washes. So it's important to not get caught up in the trap of thinking that what is right in front of you at the moment that you're doing this chipping work is the final result. If it doesn't look exactly perfect, you just have to be okay with that and just keep reminding yourself that there is more stuff to come. Okay, I think this will be the last clip in this segment of Mitchell Adventures, but this will be a good one. As you can see, I have gotten to the end of the acrylic paint weathering and painting phase on this wing and decided to go ahead and tackle something I've been dreading, which is masking and painting the de-icing boots on the leading edge of the wing, which is made much more difficult by the fact that it wraps around the curve of the wing just a little bit, as you can see over here on the wingtip. And you'd think, that with all of the canopy masking sets that we can get, that somebody would make a masking set for this. But apparently not. At any rate, it wasn't too big of a deal. What I did to make the mask for the wingtip was I just set the wing down flush on the bench top over a piece of tape. And as you can see right here, I traced around it and then cut it out and stuck it on there and got a pretty nice mask. There's a couple of other things that you might notice here. One is that I'm using some Panzer putty, which I think this is a really good application for it. I needed to basically just create a barrier there so that I wouldn't get overspray on the engine nacelle as I was spraying close to that. And it's good. I think this is one of those applications where Panzer putty works well. The stuff can be kind of a hassle. Like you can see there, it yanked up a tuft of fuzz from the little paper towel there that'll always be stuck in it. But, it is what it is, and it's good for certain things. You'll also see that I am using both regular Tamiya tape and Tamiya's skinny vinyl tape. And you'll notice that I have a little bit of a change in strategy here, and I'll explain that. Let me get rid of the Panzer putty. I just sprayed this a few minutes ago, but it should be all nice and dry because it's a mix of Tamiya flat black, flat white, and Mr. Color leveling thinner, which makes it dry pretty fast. So should be all good, and I sprayed nice and dry anyway. Now, I think we're already going to see something that I was going to talk about, and indeed that is the case. You can see, well, let me get this off of here, and we'll be able to see better what I'm about to explain. This is not the Panzer putty that has committed this grievous crime against my model, but was in fact the Tamiya tape. So here we go. You can see right here that I've got a lift, and basically what that is that's the tester's dull coat flat varnish that got yanked up, and the culprit of that was a piece of the very same Tamiya tape that the skinny vinyl tape that we're talking about right here. You can see it here on my finger where it peeled up that varnish and a little bit of color. Now, I was a little surprised because I've always thought that dull coat was a little tougher than that, and it may be just because it's only like a day old or not even that, who knows. But I'm kind of not surprised because this Tamiya tape, even though they call it low tack, it is still a vinyl tape, and there's something about the adhesive that they use on these vinyl tapes that is very aggressive. The Tamiya stuff is not nearly as bad as this 3M fine line tape is, because the fine line tape, I've had it yank paint clear down to plastic if I wasn't being careful with it. This was a little bit of a surprise because I was being careful. I hadn't really rubbed it down that much, and it still pulled some of that varnish off. Now, as paint penalties go, this is nothing. I'm definitely not going to get too upset about that because, as I always do, I will just work that into my weathering. These things are a little bit frustrating, a little bit annoying, but nothing to panic over and be upset about because at least if what you're doing is an aircraft that's going to have lots of wear and tear on it anyway, then it's perfectly reasonable to just work that into your overall scheme. So between just sort of rubbing that down with some sandpaper and hitting it with another layer of dull coat and doing some, oil weathering and so forth, that'll never be visible, or it'll be only as visible as I want it to be when it's all said and done. But that is why I have this subtle change in strategy that you may have already sort of picked up on. When I started, I put this piece of Tamiya skinny tape down first. And I was making an adjustment when I discovered this problem. And so all the rest of them, you can see, I put the regular Tamiya tape down first, and the skinny vinyl tape is laying on top of it. So that will at least reduce the magnitude of whatever problems are about to occur as I peel this off. And you can see that I've got some coming up with the Tamiya tape as well, because that's where I already had an issue before. So, you know, this is one of those things. It's going to be what it's going to be, and you just have to roll with it. But, you know, you can just never, ever let your guard down with masking. You know, even as careful as I am with it, I still will occasionally have a little problem like this. So no big deal, but I'm going to go ahead and get all of this off of here. Now you'll notice, though, that everywhere I'm pulling this off, that not only am I pulling slow, but I'm doing this thing where I peel it parallel to the surface, not away like this, but parallel and at an angle. I really should be peeling it away from the paint line as well. And what I mean by that is that I should have started, let me get some tweezers here. I should have started right here and peeled this direction. Don't ever peel towards the area that you just sprayed, because that's a good way to yank a chunk of it off with your tape. So this is what I mean when I say peel parallel to the surface and away from the paint line. So there we go. Not too bad at all. You can see that I, even as careful as I was being, I did get a little bit of overspray right there. You can see that line there from that, but that's not a big deal. Just adds more character. I don't mind stuff like that at all. So I'm just going to keep working at this. Keep carefully peeling this away. And again, trying to come away from the paint line as much as possible. It's not always possible, you know. Sometimes you're just stuck with the geometry that you're stuck with, and you got to peel it the way that you peel it. But that's also why, especially on something like this, I do two things. One is I paint really dry, which you should be doing when you're masking anyway, because that's the best way to avoid leaks under your tape. But also, I don't mash my tape down really hard. And part of the reason that I know that that's okay, and that the paint and that the tape not being stuck on there super firm isn't going to be a problem, is because of what I just said about painting dry. As long as I'm not flooding the surface, then I shouldn't have any reason to worry that if my tape is not just mashed on there super hard, that I'm going to have paint running up underneath it. So here we go. Hopefully I can get this big piece of tape off without any major dramas. There we go. All good there. And I can go ahead and get rid of these pieces. And there it is. All things considered, I would call this pretty successful. I'm looking at it through my Optivisor, and it looks like my lines are pretty tight, and my spray is good, and I have a little bit of random weathering effects right there that'll just help me build the character of this airframe. So I call that a pretty good day, especially considering how much I was dreading this particular part of the painting process on this project. Okay, so there you go. That's quite a bit of progress, I think. At least it feels like quite a bit of progress to me. I really feel like that the paint on the top surface of these wings is really kind of the focal point of this whole project. I mean, and maybe it's only to me that it feels that way. But that's the thing that caused me to want to do this project in the first place, was when I was watching that episode of, or that part of Pearl Harbor where the planes were taken off of the Hornet, and I saw that beautiful weathering on the backs of the aircraft and on the wing walks. That's really what made me want to do it in the first place. So for me, this is really the critical part and kind of the focal point of the whole project. So it's been pretty stressful. It's been a long time getting here, and it's been kind of stressful working through it, but I feel okay about it. There's no such thing as perfect, especially when you're talking about random weathering effects, but I feel like I have a good foundation laid down for the next phase of the weathering, which will be with oil paints, and which will start after I get all of the insignia painted. As I think I mentioned before, because the decals with this kit basically just disintegrate whenever they get near a glass of water, I have purchased a set of Montex masks, and I will be attempting my first ever go at spraying insignia. So that should be good, and that'll be on the next episode. So I hope you stay tuned. As always, I really appreciate you watching. If you've kept up with this thing this whole time, absolute much love to everybody who's been checking it out. Thanks again.